My heart skipped a beat as I stood there, unable to process what Karen had just said. Her words echoed in my head like a bad dream I couldn't escape. Hand over your newborn to me? I thought. This woman, a stranger, was standing in my house telling me that my wife and I weren't capable of raising our own child, that she was somehow the one to decide what was best for our daughter, as if we were unfit parents. I looked over at my wife, who was still sitting on the couch, holding our daughter in her arms. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with shock, unsure of what to do or how to respond. I could tell she was scared, too. We had always dreamed of a peaceful life in a safe neighborhood, away from the stresses of the world. Now this woman was threatening to take our daughter because of some ridiculous, made-up HOA rule. The audacity of Karen was beyond anything I had ever imagined. My body tensed, and I could feel my anger rising. I'm a calm person, but this? This was a violation of everything I stood for. My family, my rights, and my dignity. I took a deep breath and stepped in front of my wife, positioning myself between Karen and our daughter. I wasn't going to let her push us around. Not now, not ever. You need to leave, I said, my voice steady but firm. Now. Karen crossed her arms, looking at me like she was in charge, like she was the one holding the power in this situation. You don't have a choice. You've violated multiple rules, and I'm here to correct it. This is for the good of the community. Her tone was condescending, as if she was a queen issuing commands. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was a grown man, and I had served my country as a Navy SEAL. I had been through hell and back, facing real threats in some of the most dangerous parts of the world. And now I was standing here dealing with a woman who thought she had the authority to decide what happened to my family. I stood my ground. Listen, lady, I said, my patience wearing thin, I don't know who you think you are, but you don't have the right to tell me what's best for my daughter. No one in this neighborhood does. Now I want you to leave my house. I'm not going to tell you again. Karen looked at me, trying to assert her authority, but I could see the flicker of hesitation in her eyes. Maybe it was my tone, or maybe it was the way I was standing, tall, confident, not backing down, but I could tell she was starting to doubt herself. For a moment, I thought she might leave, but then she did something that surprised me. She opened her mouth to speak again, but before she could utter another word, I took a step closer. I'm not playing around, I said, my voice now a little louder, my presence more commanding. You're going to walk out that door, and you're going to forget this conversation ever happened. Do I make myself clear? She hesitated, her eyes narrowing, but she finally backed down. You'll regret this, she muttered under her breath as she turned on her heel and walked out of our house, slamming the door behind her. I let out a long breath, the adrenaline still rushing through my veins. I glanced back at my wife, who was now holding our daughter a little closer, her face still etched with confusion and fear. Are you okay? I asked her softly. She nodded, though her hands were trembling. I don't understand what just happened, she said, still in disbelief. I don't either, I admitted, shaking my head. But it's over now. I'm not going to let anyone threaten our family, especially not someone like her. I wrapped my arms around her and our daughter, holding them both tightly. We're safe, and that's all that matters. But as the hours passed, the weight of what had happened began to settle in. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wouldn't be the last time we would have to deal with Karen. People like her didn't just back off easily. And while I had stood up to her today, I knew it might take more than just words to make sure she never tried anything like this again. My mind raced as I thought about what to do next. Should I call the HOA and report her? Should we talk to the neighbors? What if she tried to pull something else, something worse? I couldn't afford to take chances, especially when it came to my family's safety. But for now, we were going to enjoy the peace we had fought for. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight we could rest. And I would do everything in my power to make sure that Karen or anyone else would never come between us and the life we had worked so hard to build. As Karen stormed off, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions, anger, frustration, and a deep sense of protectiveness for my family. But above all, I felt an intense relief. I had just stood my ground, and for the first time in a while, I had to confront someone who was threatening the safety and well-being of my family. And yet, despite the overwhelming feeling of victory, I knew this wouldn't be the end of it. I watched her walk away, her heels clicking on the pavement, and I couldn't help but wonder just how far someone like her would go to exert control over others. This wasn't the first time she tried to impose her authority in the neighborhood, but this time she had crossed a line. She didn't know who she was dealing with. Most people in the community were either too scared to challenge her or too intimidated by her position in the HOA. They didn't know what it was like to stand tall in the face of danger, to stay calm under pressure, but I did. As a Navy SEAL, I had spent years trained to stay composed in the most chaotic of situations. I had been in life and death scenarios where every decision could mean the difference between life and death. I had learned how to read people, how to stay focused when everything around me was in disarray. I was trained to deal with the worst, and when Karen had come into my home making demands like she owned the place, I knew that I couldn't back down. What most people didn't understand was that Navy SEAL training wasn't just about physical strength or combat. It was about mental toughness, the ability to control your emotions and think clearly when under pressure. I had faced down enemies, navigated hostile territories, and survived some of the most dangerous conditions in the world. But nothing had prepared me for the sight of a stranger standing in my home, demanding that I give up my daughter. I wasn't about to let that happen. The training I had undergone didn't just apply to battlefield situations. It applied to every aspect of life. I could have easily let my anger get the best of me and escalated the situation. But I knew better. I had learned over the years that the best way to handle a threat wasn't by acting impulsively. It was by remaining calm and collected, keeping control of the situation and making sure the other person knew their place. I knew Karen was rattled. Her whole demeanor shifted when I spoke. She could sense that I wasn't someone she could push around. For all her talk about authority and following rules, she didn't seem to understand what real authority looked like. And I was more than happy to show her. But even as I stood there, watching her retreat, I knew that this wasn't over. I had made my point, but people like Karen didn't give up easily. She was going to find a way to make things difficult for us again. I turned back into the house and shut the door behind me. My wife was sitting there, still holding our daughter in her arms, her face a mixture of relief and confusion. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice softer now, trying to ease her worry. "I'm fine," she replied, her voice shaky. "But what just happened? Why did she say those things? Who does she think she is?" I didn't have a clear answer for her. I knew that Karen's behavior was out of line, but explaining it to my wife felt unnecessary. What mattered was that we were safe, and no one was going to take our child away from us. I sat down next to her, wrapping my arm around both of them, trying to comfort them. "I know it's crazy, but she won't come back here. I made sure of that." My wife gave me a long look, then nodded slowly. "I'm just glad you were able to handle it. I don't know what I would have done if things had gone differently." "I've seen a lot worse," I said with a small smile, trying to lighten the mood. "But don't worry, Karen's not going to mess with us again." Despite my calm words, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeper at play here. Karen's behavior had crossed a line, and I wasn't sure what she'd do next. It was clear she wouldn't let this go easily, and I needed to be prepared. The next few days were tense. Karen didn't show her face again, but I couldn't help but keep an eye out. Every time someone from the neighborhood came by, I couldn't help but wonder if Karen had enlisted others to join her cause, or if she was plotting her next move. I knew I had to stay vigilant, especially now that I had made myself a target. But as the days went on, I couldn't help but feel a little more secure in my home. I had taken a stand, and my wife and daughter were safe. Whatever Karen had planned, I was ready to handle it. I had the training, the mindset, and the resolve to protect my family. And I wasn't going to let anyone, not even someone like Karen, threaten that. As the week passed, I made sure to keep a watchful eye on our surroundings. I wasn't about to let my guard down just yet. But one thing was for sure. I had made it clear to Karen that she couldn't push us around. And if she ever tried again, she would find out that I wasn't someone to be messed with. Not now, not ever. After Karen stormed off, I returned inside the house, my mind still racing. The adrenaline was wearing off, but my anger wasn't. My wife, still sitting on the couch with our daughter in her arms, was staring at me, her expression a mix of shock, confusion, and disbelief. I could see her hands trembling slightly, as if she was still trying to process what had just happened. She finally spoke, her voice soft but laced with concern. What just happened? She asked, looking at me like she was trying to understand why this strange woman had come into our home and demanded the unthinkable. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my mind and put things into perspective. The events of the past few minutes had been so surreal, they almost didn't feel real. I ran a hand through my hair, taking another deep breath before I spoke. I think Karen learned the hard way that some people aren't afraid of her, I said, trying to keep my tone light, though the weight of the situation still hung heavily in the air. I paused for a moment, glancing at my wife, who was still in shock. This wasn't something she'd ever expected to face, especially not in the peaceful neighborhood we had moved to. I kept my Navy SEAL past hidden from her for the most part. I didn't talk about it often, not because I was ashamed, but because it felt like a different life, one that was so far removed from the peaceful, normal life we were trying to build together. But today, it seemed that the situation had forced me to reveal that side of me, the side I kept hidden. I sat down beside her, looking into her eyes, trying to explain. I didn't want to tell you this before, but I spent years in the Navy as a SEAL. I've dealt with dangerous situations and high-pressure moments where lives were on the line. What Karen tried to do today, it was nothing compared to the kind of threats I faced, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. My wife looked at me, a mixture of disbelief and awe crossing her face. "You were a SEAL?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. It was clear that she hadn't known the full extent of my past. I could see how this revelation was shifting her perspective, not just about the situation, but about me. "Yeah," I said, nodding. "I've kept it to myself because, honestly, I didn't think I needed to bring it up. But today, well, I had to use that training. Not to fight or hurt anyone, but to stand my ground and protect you and our daughter." I could see her absorbing this new information, piecing everything together. She had never seen me act like that, calm but commanding, firm in my resolve. For a moment, the weight of the situation seemed to hit her too, but then a small smile tugged at the corners of her lips. "I'm glad you were here," she said softly, her voice laced with gratitude. "I don't know what I would have done without you." As the days went on, word about Karen's outburst spread quickly through the neighborhood. People were shocked by her behavior, and many came forward to tell us their own stories. It seemed that Karen had been causing trouble for years, pushing the boundaries of her role as HOA enforcer and stepping on anyone who dared to challenge her authority. But now, after what had happened, things were different. People were starting to realize that she was not as untouchable as she once thought. Neighbors who had previously been intimidated by Karen's constant surveillance and demands began to voice their concerns. Some even apologized to us, admitting that they had been too scared to stand up to her before, but that they now realized how wrong her actions had been. It was incredible to see how quickly things shifted. The community, once passive in the face of Karen's overreach, now had the courage to speak up. What made me the most proud was the fact that no one sided with Karen anymore. She had overstepped, and people finally saw it. My wife and I had set the example. We had stood up for ourselves, for our daughter, and for the kind of life we wanted to build, one where we weren't controlled by someone like her. And it seemed that others were ready to follow that example. As for the HOA, it didn't take long before they took notice. They called us in for a meeting that I wasn't particularly excited about. But I knew that we had to address the situation, not just for us, but for the whole neighborhood. When we sat down with the HOA representatives, they were surprisingly apologetic. They admitted that Karen had been operating outside of the HOA's guidelines and that her actions were unacceptable. They promised that they would review their policies to ensure that no one could overstep their boundaries like Karen had done. In the weeks that followed, things began to change in the neighborhood. The HOA's policies were tightened up, and Karen was removed from her position. I never saw her again, and I think we all breathed a little easier knowing that the community was no longer the thumb of someone who thought they could impose their will on everyone else. At the end of the day, the whole ordeal served as a reminder to me that sometimes the biggest threats come from the places you least expect. A power-hungry neighbor can be just as dangerous as an enemy on the battlefield if you let them push you around. But with the right training, the right mindset, and the right support, you can face anything, whether it's a literal fight for your life or a fight to protect your family's peace. The whole experience taught me something important. Boundaries are necessary, and when someone crosses them, it's up to us to defend what's ours. And in the end, standing up for what's right is always worth the fight. The neighborhood was quieter now, and as for me and my family, we had gained not only a peaceful home, but a newfound respect from the community. It felt good to know that we had made a difference, and it gave me a renewed sense of confidence in our ability to face whatever challenges came our way.